Welcome to My Shitty Podcast. So shitty it only has one T. I am your host, Adam Copeland. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for subscribing. And most importantly, thanks for telling a friend. I also want to thank my guest, Geoffrey Golden, for coming on and telling us about what he does for a living. Pretty cool stuff, if you ask me. So if you want to check him out, obviously I've got his the links to his website and all that helpful stuff in the show notes there if you want to find him. Without further ado, let's let the cat out of the bag. All right. Why don't we just start with, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody what you do for a living?
Absolutely. My name is Geoffrey Golden. I'm a game writer and narrative designer from Los Angeles. I write the stories in video games, and I've worked for clients like Capcom, Ubisoft, Square Enix, Disney, and indie game studios around the world.
Yeah, man. How did you get into that? That's crazy.
I got into it completely by accident. So I was working, when I first came out to Los Angeles, I wanted to be a writer, and I got a job working for a Flash animation studio. I don't know if how far your internet memory goes back, but the internet used to be run by Flash. It was websites like Homestar Runner would be a good example. Newgrounds was another popular one. I was working for a site that is long forgotten, like those, but worse, a lot worse. And so I was hired as one of their writers to write their cartoons. And they were like, hey, we're expanding into games. Would you like to write our Flash games? And they were like parodies of movies and other video games and stuff like that. And I was like, sure, that sounds cool. I never knew people could do that, like as a job.
Yeah.
Because I always identified as a writer, and I always loved video games, but I had been told from a very early age that it was the programmers and the designers who wrote the games, like who wrote the stories. It was just, it wasn't like a separate job. It was just like, oh, okay, I'm programming King's Quest, but somebody's got to write what the king says, so I guess I'll just do that. The king says, you're dead.
Yeah.
Game over.
Yeah.
Great stuff. So, but as games got more complicated, they started hiring writers. So anyway, I worked for this animation house, and I started writing their games. And then over time, I just started getting more and more game gigs as part of my career.
Yeah.
I've worked in a lot of different mediums. I've worked in animation. I've worked in a little bit in film and TV, a lot in comics and books and some copywriting. But games have sort of been consistently something I've been working in and out of. And then about 3 years ago, I decided to focus on games full time as my one true passion, and it has paid off ever since. It was a great idea to do that.
How is writing for a game program different than like writing a screenplay or like a pilot for a TV show? I'm currently in the process of writing a children's show pilot right now, and it is
awesome.
Yeah, man, it's my first writing project, so it's gonna suck. Is basically what I'm trying to say.
Listen, if I was in Vegas and I could bet on, they were like, you could bet on whether Adam's first ever screenplay will suck. I would take those. I would definitely bet against you. Not because I don't think you're a cool guy.
Yeah.
I think you're a very cool guy. But you're right. Most people's first writing sucks. Mine certainly did.
Yeah.
I had to go through a lot of suck before you could get to stuff that people will actually pay you for.
Yeah.
But congrats on beginning the journey,
because
it's a lot of people talk about it. Not a lot of people climb the mountain. So good luck on your expedition.
Thank you. Yeah. So how is that different from like writing? Like how is a narrative for a game different than like a narrative for a TV show or movie, for instance?
There are so many differences that the question in some ways can be a little overwhelming.
Gotcha.
But I'll try to break it down as simply and as succinctly as I can. Because it's so different from an industry perspective and from a craft perspective. So from an industry perspective, Every TV show, every movie is pretty much written the same way in terms of like formatting, in terms of like story structure. They all follow fairly rigid formulas that have been established over 100 years or so of the professional industry, 50 to 100 years, depending on the medium we're talking about. Whereas no, I've been working in video games for years now. No two video games are written alike. This is because of genre considerations. Different genres of video games have very different writing needs. We have different studios that have just different. Some studios have been working with writers for years. They have their own, programming languages like designed specifically for their writers to work in, whereas others, they've never hired a writer before, and you're the one who's coming in and bringing all that to the table. So format is completely different, and in general, like the craft is different too. Again, it can depend on genre, but oftentimes, interactive narratives, when we're talking about writing, we're talking about imbuing subtext and meaning into a work, right? That is relatively, it's hard. It's a hard craft. Writing is a hard craft.
Yeah.
It's hard to do to imbue a text with deep subtext and meaning. That is difficult in and of itself. But then try doing that when the player has radically different options in terms of what actions they can do. Like, how do you impart that meaning to a player, right? So it is world building. It is so different, but there are similarities. It's not without overlap. We write in games, we'll write cinematics are often written in a similar way to screenplays. So they're even sometimes written in screenplay format, but not always. And there's a lot of writing that doesn't. There's no equivalent in TV writing for like writing item descriptions.
Yeah.
Like there's just no real equivalent to it. Maybe you're in charge as a TV show writer of writing the descriptions on your YouTube videos, maybe, but probably not, honestly. If you're writing for Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network, it's like a whole other department. So anyway, yeah, anyway, I hope that was gave you some idea.
Sure.
An innocent question. I have worked in both, so I see so many differences that it's just to me, it's like oh, how do I even wrap my head around it?
Yeah, I'm envisioning or imagining a A, B, and C narrative. Like you'll probably write something, and then character A asks character B, or character B tells character A, you've got three options. You can either steal the car, punch the character, or accept the mission. And then you have to write A, B, and C rebuttals. Like, all right, you asshole. Yeah. Or, hey, you stole my car. I don't know.
100%. But that also, it not only would you have to write the rebuttals, but it also, the answers that you give may affect your storyline.
Yeah.
It may affect future options that you might have as a character. If you are, if the game is saying, oh, this guy's a jerk, he chooses the jerk option.
Yeah.
Well, in later dialogue, we're not even going to give him the cool guy options. We're only going to give him different jerk options.
Yeah.
It really can. It's how other NPCs characters treat you in the game. It's just there's so many things that dialogue could affect. And it all needs to be written. It's all written by somebody,
Right. Yeah. Right on. That's awesome. Do you work alone most of the time, or do you work with a team? Does that change all the time, every day?
It doesn't change all the time, every day. It definitely depends on the studio. I have written with teams. In fact, I've led teams before. But for the most part, the vast majority of the work I do is solo. I'll be the writer that the game hires. But it really depends on the genre of you're working in and the size of the company that you're working with. So if you're writing for a company like, let's say, Blizzard, right? Blizzard hires like a staff of quest writers. They hire a bunch of people to do it. I don't want to say tons, but they hire a bunch of people to do it. They hire people to manage the lore, multiple people. There's a lore department for World of Warcraft that all they do is they just catalog and they write and catalog and figure out the lore of that game. Like, whereas your average indie game, if it's an RPG, yeah, they'll maybe have a writer, because it's like a team of 7 people. I tend to work for mid-size indies, games with maybe 20 to 30, staffers, but most of the people that they need are programmers, designers, artists especially are really crucial. In fact, another narrative designer who I believe works for Ubisoft, she figured out that the narrative design is about 1% of the industry. Yeah. So if you're looking for like the most competitive job in games, consider narrative design. There are hundreds of applicants for every job opening. It can be tough to get work. But yeah, that's so yeah. Anyway, yeah, that's the thing there.
Do you get to, like, let's say you write a game? Do you get to say, "Hey, I want to voice the troll under the bridge. I'd like that role." Do you get to throw your hat in the ring and they go, "Yeah, we got a team of trolls. You're the last on that list," or are they like, "Okay, man, your project. Let's hear what you got for a troll voice"?
I won't propose myself, but sometimes I have been asked to do voice work. Yes. For example, in a game I wrote, Fallen Legion Revenants, which is out for Nintendo Switch and PlayStation. I have a very small part as it's like a dark and serious game about making moral choices in a fantastic pandemic that turns people into monsters. Oddly enough, which was written entirely before COVID-19. It just happened to become incredibly, it has just happened to become incredibly relevant.
Yeah.
But anyway, I play a very small comic relief character, a very nerdy character in this universe, who's tonally very different than most of the other characters in the game, but it's a very small part for comic relief. So I played that. Sometimes they'll ask me to do. So I work with game studios, around the world, and sometimes they'll ask me to do a temp voice because they just need somebody with an American accent who could kind of give the demo the feel of, and then they'll recast me later with a professional. I've done voice work before. I do a lot of work in podcasting and audio and stuff like that, but I haven't pursued voice work professionally. It's its own art form, particularly video games and anime and stuff. It's its own art form. It has its own amazing and talented groups of people who do that work. Right. And my hat's off to them. They're awesome.
Yeah, I am training with a voice coach right now to hopefully break. That's a little bit of like my diabolical plan with this children's show is that I'll possibly be I'll be able to cast myself, but we'll see when we cross that bridge. Yeah,
it's maybe more common in animation, I think. At least I can think of more examples of it.
Sure.
Of writer creators who also do voice work. I could think of a couple examples of that off the top of my head. Whereas I'm not intimately familiar with many narrative designers who are also consistent professional voice actors. I imagine that's a small overlap, but I could be wrong.
Right.
Prove me wrong, everybody.
I'm going to prove you. I'm going to prove you wrong towards the end of the podcast with a show that you and I have in common. But
Okay.
or
Great.
at least give you one example.
Yeah.
But
one example wouldn't prove me wrong.
That's true.
I would need a lot of You'd need a lot of examples.
That's true because you.
But I do look for. But I look forward. He could be the one. Person could be the one exception. But by all means, I am interested to hear how we overlap. I'm very curious.
Okay, yeah. Because truth be told, you did say it was a very small percentage, so that's strengthens your point. I want you to talk about your podcast a little bit. Your podcast is called "Worst Movies Ever Played."
Yes, that's right. Worst Movies Ever Played it's a show where are you familiar with actual plays?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah, and your audience probably know actual plays. It's role playing games that are played and then recorded, and then we add music and sound effects and such to create a show. Well, we do one called Worst Movies Ever Played. Most of actual plays are set in like a D&D type fantasy universe. But for us, we play a game called Straight to VHS, which is a role-playing game where you improvise bad 80s movies. So what we do on the show is we make up on the spot using a role-playing game system terrible VHS movies, the kind that you would see in the dumpster behind a blockbuster. Yeah. So an example of an episode I really enjoyed, I played a Chuck Norris type action star whose best friend was killed in a war, but his brain was saved and transplanted into Air Force One. Yeah. And so I've been called in to ride my best friend, who is a plane, across the country and safeguard his travel, but we're invaded by European terrorists. And so I have to fight the terrorists single-handedly to save my best friend's life, who is a plane. And it is called Air Force Fun because of how much fun I have defeating these terrorists. It was all so that's an example of the kind of, and we have a Hollywood sound designer who brings the show to life. So it's a really entertaining thing. We do new movies. We're actually just about to launch our second season. We're getting very close.
Yeah.
To launching our second season. So that's exciting. And it's on the Starburns Audio, the network of Harmontown and Gilbert Gottfried's show. So
yeah, man, I want to applaud you on your production value. I was very, coming from a shitty podcast, I was very impressed by wow, this is pretty good, man.
Oh, thank you. He's Adam Baker is the sound designer. He does, he's actually brothers with Patrick, one of my co-hosts. Is me, Patrick, and Brendan. And Adam worked on the Invisible Man movie, if you remember that came out recently. Mm-hmm. That's one of his, and a number of other films. So yeah, he's really awesome. He's really the MVP of the show in some ways.
You worked on the Invisible Man with Kevin Bacon. Is that the same?
Was that the recent Invisible? It was like the recent one, I think. With
that one's definitely not recent.
No. This was the one with Peggy from Mad Men.
Oh, okay. Then yeah.
Yeah, I think that was the one he worked on.
Okay,
yeah.
I gotcha, man. I gotcha. You've got a lot of success in this realm, and I'm curious about. I know that your imagination just in order for you to succeed, it has to go wild. There was even in your bio, it talked a little bit about like your first video game or storyline you created. It was like on a dinner mat you wrote out. So did you imagine your success at a young age, or were you just like tunnel vision, like I'm going to create stories, I'm a storyteller, something in my DNA? Or did you...
I think it was more the latter. I I never was like, I'm going to be like a big superstar. I want to be like super famous or
Yeah.
whatever.
Slick back your
I
hair.
always just, but I always just really wanted to write for a living. That was like a goal of mine from a very young age. I was writing cartoons when I was a little kid. I made cartoons, and I wasn't really good at the art, but I loved writing the jokes in like comic strips. I used to read like Garfield and Bloom County, a lot of like old comic books, comic strips, and I'd read them as the treasuries, and then I'd want to draw my own. I wrote. I was like reading like art of the screenwriting, like when I was in like middle school or high school or something like that. Like I think I wrote my first spec script in high school. It was a Powerpuff Girls. It was not very good. As first specs often are.
Yeah.
But I wanted to do projects. I hosted. We put together. I got together with some of the kids in my grade, and we formed like a radio club, and we recorded a radio show, and it aired on the local college radio station. We would do. I wrote a short film in school, and then in college I did a lot of stuff, a lot of projects and things. All I think with the aim that I wanted to be a professional writer, and I didn't 100% know what that was going to look like, but I knew that's what I wanted. Like it was something deep in myself. In fact, I remember going to a college, like an open house, like a college open house. And I was in a room with about like 50 or 60 other kids or something like that. And they were going to lead us on a tour through the campus. And, but at the start of the tour, they said, how many of you know what you want to do for the rest of your life? And I was literally the only person who raised their hand, literally the only one in the group. I've known what I've wanted to do for forever and ever and ever.
That's pretty good, man. I certainly, I mean, I'm creeping up on 40 right now, and I'm just now like, I want to write a children's show. I want to do that now, and like just sinking my teeth in. So I've got a lot of time to make up for and to catch up to get to where you're at.
I don't think you do, because honestly, people start their careers at different times. If you're willing to stick to it, I mean, the advantage that like a young person has is that like they can just they have this like focus and determination, and they can burn through their bad writing fast.
Yeah.
But the advantage that an older person has breaking in as a writer is they have life experience. And, when you read a lot of like young people's writing, some of it is extraordinary. But a lot of it is derivative, and there's a reason. Mine certainly was, and there's a reason for that. It's like you don't have a lot of life experience. What you're doing when you first start your career is that you're imitating what other people do. You're imitating the stuff that you like, and you're trying your best to copy it and to figure out how it works. But when you're older, as you've had bosses, as you've had breakups, as you've had celebrations, but also disappointments, you can infuse your work also like a better understanding of history, better understanding of the way the world works, better understanding of human nature. You can bring that to your writing. And so an older writer with that life experience has that to draw from. I don't think but a lot of the under 30 and they're millionaires, all that's all bullshit.
Yeah.
Really, I would say the vast majority for writers, I would say probably, if I had to bet on it, most of the most successful writers are older, just because it takes a long time to have something worthwhile to say,
Yeah.
and to master the craft. by the way, I don't think that's the case now with artists, with visual artists. It used to be, I think, that way, but now I don't know. Like so many incredible visual artists are like coming right out of school, and it's like mind-boggling how good they are. Like it's just incredible the wealth of talent of young artists working. It's really really remarkable. So yeah, so it's but it's a different art form. It's very different.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Cool, man. I wanted to talk a little bit. This kind of segues into. I know that you've got a framed portrait of Alf on your desk.
Yeah, I did have it on my desk. That's right. And now, good research, very good research. It is now it's now hanging in a place of honor in the living room. But it did for a long time. It was at my desk. Yes.
Good deal. This is gosh, I forget his first. Paul Fusco.
Yeah, Paul Fusco, voice and puppeteer and creator of Alf.
Yep, he wrote it,
absolutely,
directed it, produced it, and that was going to be my one example of like I know a guy that had an idea for a show that.
Oh well, yeah. As I said, in TV, I think it's more common. It's in video games where I think it's less common.
I
but
see.
in TV, I think it's more common. I can think of people, Seth MacFarlane. I mean, I can think of a number of people who are creators as well as actors in the thing that they create. 100 in TV. Television is more of is in that sense is more of an auteur medium for television creators. Like if you really get into that very lucky and fortunate position where you can create a TV show, it could be your voice and you can hire yourself to be in it. And if you're a comedian, you're expected to be in it often in some way. At least there's a historical example. Video games isn't, generally speaking, an auteur medium. Even for indie games with small teams, it's a team sport. It's and in the biggest levels for AAA, it's toys. It's basically comes from toy companies. That's what we're making. Essentially, yeah. And so it's like, do you know like the guy who invented Stretch Armstrong? And did the guy who invented Stretch Armstrong, was that like his vision? Like was that like his vision? Like maybe, but just as likely, Stretch Armstrong was the product of like a number of creators. Marketing. In addition to the person who designed the stretch material, the person who drew the first, the prototype, the concept, the design team, the plastics team, the marketing team, maybe there's a story writer or narrative writer who came up with the story behind Stretch Armstrong, yeah. All those people contribute to it in a meaningful way and in such a way that you don't really know who the original creator was.
Yeah.
It was manufactured. It was created by a company. That's generally speaking how video games are made too. Except that with the exception that in video games there's end credits, and that's I think why a lot of gamers know who people who work in video games are. They know because they got to the end and they saw this person in the credits and they looked them up on Twitter. And there they are. That's really cool. So how many in that sense, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I go on and on. You go. You get in here.
I was going to ask how many
monologue here.
How many screenshots of your own name on I got to put that on my resume.
I have definitely taken screenshots. But you know why? It's partly because I just want and I post them on Twitter too. It's like, whatever, I want my credit.
Yeah, of course.
I do this for some glory. But the big reason you do it is because you can get industry badges for trade shows. And so, but you need proof that you worked on these games, and the credits is often what you can use to say, okay, I worked on this game, and here's me in the end credits. So.
Um, I
There's
want
a
to,
practical consideration in addition to vanity,
yeah,
in addition to endless vanity.
vanity's a given. Yeah, absolutely. But also there is a purpose for it. I want to circle back to Alf. I'm just curious
Yeah,
because
let's get in
I,
there with Alf. I love talking about Alf.
and I hold it near. I lit up whenever I was like, oh shit, a framed picture of Alf. This is great because I've got a lot to say about Alf.
Oh,
And
good. Me too.
just
Let's talk Alf.
okay, great. Number one, love the show. I don't know if it was just like the one liners, but or like the now that I'm like digging my claws into writing, like the just like chef's kiss sitcom monologue of like, oh Al, oh my gosh, that you have the I don't know, the model family. I could go on and on, but I want to hear like why it resonates with you. Those are just like some examples of like, oh, I really like this, and I can watch it from a nostalgia standpoint and also from like a writing standpoint of like, ooh, that was good. That's good what they did there.
Great. Here are my thoughts on Alf. Alf, okay, when I was a kid, I loved Alf. And the reason I loved Alf probably had as much to do with what Alf wasn't, which was a Muppet.
Yeah.
I loved the Muppets. I still am a huge Muppets nerd. I have some Muppets memorabilia and stuff, some rare stuff and some weird stuff I collect. The Muppets, I love them. And I always considered Alf to be sort of a cousin of the Muppets. He didn't want to cross over with the Muppets. There was that opportunity. Jim Henson offered him that opportunity.
Yes.
And he didn't take it because he didn't want people to think Alf was a Muppet.
Mm-hmm.
I think if people thought Alf was a Muppet, I think it would have benefited Alf.
Yeah.
I think that was a mistake from Paul Fusco, but I get it. At the time, Alf was big on its own. Alf was a huge industry on its own.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, he didn't want to confuse the brand, so to speak. I get it. Whenever I've revisited Alf as an adult, the things I love the puppetry.
Oh,
I love Alf dressing up in different costumes. And I love his faux Rodney Dangerfield, like if Rodney Dangerfield was like an even bigger asshole and like lived in your house forever, like kind of attitude. Like I still appreciate that. I think that like I love Alf as like more as a bit of ironic nostalgia than I do like appreciate like
sure.
the art of Alf. Like there are shows that I can go back and I can rewatch that I legitimately love. Like I'll rewatch Daria like at any time. I love that show.
Yeah.
I think that show holds up today. Classic sitcoms. I'll watch Taxi anytime, depressing as hell, but I love it. I've recently watched episodes of The New Girl and I still enjoy The New Girl a lot. I don't think I legitimately love Alf, but I did buy all of Alf magazine. I did buy
the comics.
I bought all 4 issues. No, not the comics. So that's good. That's cool that I believe Marvel produced Alf comics.
I think so.
This was a separate thing. This was like People magazine.
There was
like Time magazine.
There was Alf magazine.
Alf magazine.
I missed this.
It was produced by a company called Welsh Publishing Group, and what they would do in the 80s and 90s is they would license a property like DuckTales, G.I. Joe, Real Ghostbusters, and then they would make the magazine. So if you were a kid on going to a newsstand or going to a supermarket or something, you'd be like, oh, Garfield magazine. I have to have that because I love Garfield and I need to know what's up with Garfield.
Yeah.
There were tons of them. I've been sort of collecting them on and off. And a friend of mine knew this and invited me on his podcast. And as a surprise guest, was the editor in chief of Alf magazine.
Wow.
And it was a wild conversation, as my friend Jason Clam did that. So anyway, I do really have an endless fascination with Alf as a cultural artifact, without question. And there are things about Alf that I do legitimately enjoy, in addition to the ironic nostalgia. And of course, the Simpsons joke of Alf now in Pog form, which was still one of the top Simpsons jokes as far as I'm concerned, one of my favorites.
So good. Geoffrey, and in every show I always ask my guests, like, what's the worst part of your job? What do you dislike about working, doing what you do?
Absolutely. So it really, no two companies are alike. And so at every company, you're going to have people you butt heads with, or people that don't, that give you, okay, so notes is a thing, right? As a writer, you have to learn to take a lot of notes. And, in games, oftentimes that everybody's work is shown to everybody else. So for example, on a recent game project, I'm on like a channel where I can see like all the art and I can comment on the artwork that comes in. The same is true for writing. I put my writing on this channel and anybody can comment on the writing. Now, if I'm working for a foreign studio, not everybody is necessarily going to understand the cultural mores, that I'm drawing from. And so they might be, in fact, they might even be offended by something that I didn't even realize, this in this person's culture, that is, completely different, than how that character would not be portrayed that way. Or it won't resonate in the same way, in addition to the fact that you're getting notes from people from a lot of different disciplines. And so, you're getting notes from, an art team, you're getting notes from marketing folks, you're getting notes from a producer, you're getting notes from, your from your creative director, who might have a programming background. And so, you're getting notes from all these different sources and they can be pretty disparate. So that can be really tough. And, you have to learn as a writer what notes to take, what notes make the work better, and what notes you have to ignore, and hope that they don't bring up again. Because like at the end of the day, if everybody is bought in on the concept and everybody is bought in on the themes and the tone, then of the work, then people may have disagreements about various things. It's something that you really love, that you think, oh, this is so cool. Like, this is such a great character. This is an incredible story element. People are going to love it. But like your team doesn't get it because they didn't grow up with XYZ,
right.
Ironically, I get hired by foreign teams because I'm an American. I'm talented, and because I'm an American writer who can bring that sense of cultural understanding. But, everybody has an opinion, and those opinions matter, So it's this interesting, can be very tricky balance. It can be frustrating at times for sure.
Yeah.
Another thing that is frustrating about my job is that the game writers in America don't have a union. If you are successful and you become an animation writer, you could join a union. Now there's different quality. Animation TV writing, they're renegotiating their union contract right now. They're not very happy with the terms of their union, but they are in a union. They get health benefits. There are certain minimums, that they can't charge low. They can't. You can't sell a script for lower than this. And if you're in the Writers Guild of America, those minimums are generally very high, and that's a very good. You have a lot of negotiating power in that union. That's a very powerful union. They can bring the industry to a halt, and they have. Games doesn't have that. In the UK, there is a game writers union. I wish we had one in America, and I know people are working on it. I know, in fact, I met one of the people who is working on it, and they're doing great work. But I can't wait for our work to be unionized, because then I can point to standards. I could get health insurance through that union. I'm often an independent contractor.
Mm-hmm.
I'm responsible for all that stuff, and I would love to be to be working with the team, and also to help people coming up in the industry, and to strengthening their hand, and forging those alliances. Now there are plenty of resources and groups for game writers out there. There are a lot of resources, but it's just not the same as a union. It's really that's the best possible. Yeah. That's the gold standard in terms of labor.
Yeah, that's rough, man. That's rough. All right, well, Geoffrey, and enlightening also. I didn't know that like the Writers Guild did not cover game writing as well.
No.
Wow.
So Writers Guild East covers journalism. I think it's TV, film, and all, but also online journalism.
Mm-hmm.
So like BuzzFeed, I think, is unionized through WGE. I could be wrong about that. And then West Coast, it's solely movies and television. Yep. In fact, they were flirting with game writing for a while, and they even had like game writing award, and they stopped giving it out. Basically, they were just like, no, we're pulling up the drawbridge. We are solely for film and television writers. I think they should rename themselves. I think they should call themselves the TVMWGA, or and Motion Picture Writers Guild of America, because there's a lot of other types of writers out there besides TV and film writers, and for that matter, game writers. There's people who write articles. There's novelists, people who write books, technical writing. It's a lot of different types of writers out there. But shout out to the Communication Workers of America who have taken on some game writing work, and who have led strikes, successful strikes. Communication Workers of America, very well named, because they offer coverage for mediums throughout communication industries. So we give them a big thumbs up.
Yeah, that's great. Geoffrey, in tradition of every show, we always end with a poop story. Have you ever pooped your pants or come close to pooping your pants? Maybe a good friend of yours has a better story than you. That's a common occurrence. But,
a good poop story.
Yeah. Or have you ever written a good poop story?
Have I ever written a good poop story? The thing that comes to mind, it's not me, but it is interesting. I'm big into zines. I love going to zine fests, and there's a whole culture around zines. And
tell the listener
I remember
what zines are like.
Oh, sure. Zines are like tiny, like small, independently produced publications. So these are things that people traditionally would produce by themselves with like stolen copy paper from work and like a Sharpie and like a stapler, and they're just like making these cool zines, cutting out magazine clippings and like putting them together and stuff. They're super cool. I mean, now there's like beautiful zines, risograph, and that, there's like beautiful zines, but I don't know. I really like just like the free for all, anybody can do it kind of nature. It's like, you can make a publication that's featured in a bookstore or a comic store, whatever. And, you just need, a piece of paper folded up. So I remember going to this old shop, Meltdown Comics, which is in Los Angeles, but we used to be in Los Angeles, and they had a lovely zine section. Oh, there's some construction going on upstairs. There's that construction I worried about earlier.
Right on
That
time.
got real loud.
It's all good.
I remember going to Meltdown, and there was like a bunch of new zines, and one of them, I think it was called. I want to say the zine was called Shit Stain. Was the name of the zine? I think I could be wrong about it. I think it was called Shit Stain, and it had its cover was like a piece of like a paper towel that had like a realistic looking brown stain on it. And it looked like shit. It looked like somebody had shit onto this zine, and we bought it. We were like, yeah, that is worth $4. Yes, I could show that to people, and they will be grossed out. So we bought the shit zine.
Success.
That was cool. That's the thing that comes to mind.
That's pretty good. Geoffrey, you've got so much going on. As opposed to listing it, I'm just going to put your website in the show links so people can click to it and get to you really easily. There's some hyperlinks on your website there. I saw. Yeah, let's get that plug in there right now. What was the plug? And I apologize for not giving you a platform before closing us out.
You're great. Thank you so much. I just want everybody to know about Adventure Snack.
Yes.
It's a project that I'm super proud of. We've been going for close to 3 years now. Do you remember playing like Choose Your Own Path adventure games? These books.
Yes.
With Joe, you could make choices in the games, right? I loved those growing up. And so I made Adventure Snack, which is like that for adults. Basically, I write twice a month these little interactive story games that I send to your email. And then you can play them. They're short and they're fun. You can play them on a lunch break. We've done stories where you play as the president's cat, helping, save America from Armageddon. We've done ones where the course of the future depends entirely on what sandwich you order that day for lunch. There's one where you are the god of a universe, but your God box is full, and so you have to delete stuff from existence. You have to figure out what you want to delete. It's a free game. I do it because I love it, and you can go to adventuresnack.com and sign up for that.
So much fun. You get so much crap like in your email. It's kind of like getting snail mail nowadays. Like somebody wrote me a handwritten letter. This is a lot of fun. A postcard. Nobody sends those anymore. This is kind of like a fun way to open your email and like, okay, this is going to be fun. I'm getting to this.
Exactly that kind of thing. It's something completely unexpected maybe makes your day a little bit more fun, or a little less quote unquote shitty. With one T.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Well, Geoffrey, thank you so much. That's it for us. Play us out, Shitty Ukulele.